What's up, car nerds? Welcome back to the Feel for Thought podcast. I'm Jay.
I'm Kevin.
And this is episode 25. We got a really good one for you guys this week. We're going to shit on some electric cars.
Yeah, we both, we've done it like previously, shitting on electric cars. We are both not fans of it.
It's a common theme. And today we're just going to lay out, it's not going to be a bias like our bias. We're just going to kind of spit some facts out at you as to some problems with the electric car industry and why maybe it's overhyped and people seem to think it's a lot cooler and more interesting and more impactful than it really is. And then at the end, we'll kind of give our take on the whole topic and where we think it's going to go. So yeah, you want to kick it off?
Yeah, so it really, we broke it down into a few categories that we think are things that are definitely overlooked and not enough attention given to it.
Yeah.
Because I feel like electric cars is kind of this status that's almost like a polished turd. Like at the top, it's like, it looks nice. It's like fancy, futuristic. But then when you get underneath, it's just a pile of shit.
Exactly. Yeah. It's kind of like, they put some gold over top. A golden turd. There you go.
Yeah. Exactly.
But yeah, so the first thing I wanted to touch on and something that I read in the news that really kind of inspired this entire episode is, if you guys aren't subscribed to Morning Brew, they do like a kind of like a financial news breakdown. But I saw when we had that cold snap here in Toronto a couple weeks back in January, there was this article in Texas that the cold snap had actually gone down there as well. It was down to minus 40 or minus 45 Fahrenheit down there. And people were actually abandoning their Teslas at the charging stations because even after like 3 hours of having them plugged in, they just wouldn't charge. Like it would literally be at 20% and it would just not increase the level at all. So yeah, people literally just abandoned them and took public transit or got someone else with a gas powered car to pick them up. So yeah, I thought that was pretty funny, honestly, especially considering we live in Canada.
Yeah, to be fair though, like cold just wreaks havoc on anything.
True.
It is a big issue for any diesel cars.
Yeah,
they will have especially high compression diesel trucks will have a huge issue starting.
Yeah.
And usually you need like 2 batteries plus a booster pack, and then you need to kind of put it in the block heater for a while, and it's this whole thing. But I feel like the electric cars are just have it way worse because you can't block heat or boost a Tesla. It's just the batteries are dead.
The battery's the battery. Like in the car, you have the battery to power things in the car, and that's powered by the engine. But in Tesla, your battery is your battery. So
exactly,
that's the other thing. But yeah, again, like diesel, it doesn't have a spark or anything, right? So that's the other thing. Like in gas powered cars, it's easy for the engine to warm up once it's actually running because it has natural heat coming from the combustion. So I feel like that's the other thing too. But the craziest thing is just to think about have you ever used your phone in a really cold weather and it doesn't have a case or something, or you're just outside for a while and all of a sudden you just look at your phone, it's dead, but you charge it when you go. I've had that a couple times, and I think I know they're well insulated, the batteries in a Tesla, but I think when it gets to those temperatures, which it does pretty frequently here in Canada, I think your car's pretty much useless. You're better off just leaving it in the garage.
Yeah, and that's kind of an issue. People might not think of it, they'll have it in the garage, they'll take it to work, and then they're kind of stranded at work because they're outside in the cold weather, so then they can't take it home.
Yeah, exactly.
And once it's in the cold, you can't really start it, so you have to find somewhere that's warm, so take it to a shop or just leave it and wait until it's warm again outside.
Yeah, the thing I thought of as well is if you're just driving, when you have a gas powered car or a diesel car, you know when you run out of gas or run out of diesel. But if it's really cold and your battery is just randomly dying, you can't really see it at the time, and it's just cold, or it gets really cold overnight, or while you're driving, it could just randomly die on you. You don't know. So that could be kind of, I guess, even hazardous on the road. Yeah,
for sure.
But yeah, I think that's definitely a big thing. The whole battery situation never really been enticing to me. But it also goes to the opposite extreme too, with heat, right? Obviously engines get warm too in the summer, but the coolant helps and stuff like that. But again, you have no circulation of any kind of coolant in a battery engine. So like a phone, it's a lot easier for it to overheat. And I think I've heard of that before in Phoenix and down in Mexico. I think there's been a couple of cars. Just, it's not as big of a problem as cold, I think.
You'd think though, because it's designed mostly in California, you'd think they would have a kind of a solution around that.
Yeah.
But yeah, to that point, there's not really, you can't just go and, because a car, you'll open the hood, let the engine vent.
Yeah.
You can't really open a battery case and let
it's
the
really
batteries
part
vent.
of the chassis, so
Yeah.
it's kind of hard to break that open. But yeah, I'm curious if they have, like, I'm sure they, in the bigger, like, cars, like the Model X, they might have, like, a fan system or something. Like, they should have something, I'm guessing.
They probably have some sort of cooling strips, like whether
Yeah.
that's air or liquid, to cool them down. Because we see that in PCs, right? We'll
Exactly.
have liquid cooling, like that kind of runs around the components. Is usually some sort of oil-based cooling, because it helps dissipate heat.
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting. I don't know if I want to research that because I don't really care that much about electric cars, but it'd be interesting to know like what kind of cooling, because I think they're supposed to be watertight. The battery cells are supposed to be watertight, so it'd be interesting to know like what kind of cooling goes in there if it's an enclosed system.
Yeah, that's honestly a really good question. And again, like, even not even on hot days, but if you just drive for a long amount of time and then you like use a fast charger, which warms up the battery even more. Like, say you're traveling somewhere in Canada or the US, like you're doing like an 800-kilometer road trip and you drive 400 kilometers, charge it for 30 minutes using a fast charger, and then continue the other 400 kilometers, like that battery's gonna be piping hot by the time you get like to your destination, right? So there almost has to be some way for them to cool it off, but
Yeah,
again, it's hard to tell.
it's funny you mentioned that. I watched a video on YouTube of, because I was skeptical, but someone did it, I think cross-country road trip in a Tesla,
Yeah.
and it worked it worked fine. The range was pretty good, no overheating, no issues. The only like real major, I guess, twist in the story was it took a lot longer, because you think of a supercharger or the fast charging stations, it's like, okay, you can fill your car in 2 hours, but that's only in like very highly
That's true.
populated areas.
Yeah.
So probably 90% of them are like normal chargers. Some of them weren't even Tesla branded, they're just like normal chargers for like Prius or whatever.
Yeah.
And then the whole road trip took like I don't know, 20 hours, but then there's a bunch of other time like waiting.
Yeah,
It's just at
exactly.
coffee shops for like 5 hours waiting for your car to charge.
Yeah.
And to me, that's like the whole point of a road trip is to drive.
Yeah.
That just sounds awful.
Not
Just sitting there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like twiddling your thumb for 5-6 hours, and then you 3 hours of driving, and then back to charging. So
Yeah, it's brutal. And then it's coming too, so you're almost like dreading the time.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'll talk about that in a little bit actually too, when we talk about distance and the problems with distance with the charging situation. But no, it's definitely a big consideration, especially in these larger countries like Canada and the US. In Europe, it might be okay because you don't really drive too much. And like, for example, like I'm from the Netherlands, like the country's 300 kilometers side to sides. Like you're completely fine having an electric car there. But it's more these bigger, colder countries that it becomes a real problem. And honestly, even for gas-powered cars, like if you're driving certain parts of Canada, it becomes difficult. Like there's not even gas stations everywhere. So
Yeah, and even like our cars.
Yeah.
Like we need high octane.
Exactly.
You can't really find that everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. That's not very common everywhere. But anyway, so the next thing I wanted to talk about too was the F-150 Lightning production and this sharp drop. And I even read this again on Morning Brew that they laid off like quite a huge portion of the staff working on the Lightning. So I'm not really sure what's going on there, but it seems like it's not really selling all that well.
So it's an interesting thing because there was so much. So Tesla was kind of the first company to, I'd say, hint at a fully electric pickup truck. Because I mean, Tesla's always been the first. They did the Roadster, then the Model S, and they've always been the king. And then there was kind of a gap in the market. Electric trucks weren't really around. And then they hinted at the Cybertruck and kind of created demand for it, but then took forever to actually put in production.
Exactly.
We're talking about like years, I don't know, 4 years or something.
Yeah.
And that's when Ford kind of came in. Ford and I think it's Rivian kind of came in and saw the gap in the market. They're like, let's sell it.
Yeah.
And Ford was really the first one to, I want to say, mass produce. I think Rivian came out first, but Ford just mass produced it. And I think they overestimated the demand for it because like looking at the market right now, I feel like the Lightnings first fetched a big premium when they first came out. People were paying over sticker. And now I feel like dealerships are almost like giving so many discounts because they're desperately trying to get them off their lot.
Yeah, and that's the weird thing too, because it's not even just the Lightning. Like, it sounds like a unique story, but even Tesla, right? Like, obviously they dropped the ball when they took so long to bring the Cybertruck online, and that's really why Ford and Rivian tried to beat them to it and succeeded. So that was kind of their first flop. But then they also, like, after Elon left and everything, like, prices are being slashed dramatically, and we even saw like the secondhand market for Teslas, right? Like, we saw 10 to 15,000 fall off their prices, but they were going for secondhand just because there were so many in production and so much supply, but the demand was kind of tapering, if not, you know, slightly declining. So I think that's kind of an interesting, like, universal thing going on with the EV market right now.
Yeah, so initially Teslas were kind of a hot commodity and people were kind of using them as assets. But now the depreciation on them is getting so bad because it's kind of like, I want to compare it to an iPhone.
I was just going to say that,
yeah. Because it's a hot commodity that everyone wants, but the used market for iPhones
doesn't
is
exist.
So bad.
Yeah. Like, nobody wants a secondhand phone. They know it's going to be either dropped, which doesn't really apply to Tesla, or, like, the biggest thing is just the battery life, because nobody wants a phone with 80% battery life remaining, because you know you're going to have to service it in a year. So, again, that's probably the same thing with Tesla, because those battery packs are expensive to replace.
Yeah, for sure. And also, just in terms of, it's small, but, like, I feel like it's almost like a tech company that every couple months they have a new feature or new styling or new something on a Tesla, and the consumer mentality is like, I want the latest and greatest.
Exactly.
So you don't want to, you know, go back and buy a Tesla from 4 years ago that won't have, I don't know, it's some sort of thing on the interior that doesn't, you know, that the new one has. So it's kind of it feels like a step back, and that's the thing. That's the issue with creating cars that kind of have a status symbol to them, is you're not really buying the car for the car itself. You're buying it for kind of a way to show off.
Yeah. It's almost like back in, like, the 40s and 50s, you know, when, like, post World War II, everything was being mass produced and manufactured, and, like, everyone wanted, you know, the typical white picket fence house with, like, the new car and the new washing machine, the new fridge, everything in their house. And that, like, and of course they bought TVs, and then they could stream ads on the TVs and, like, show that to, you know, white families in the 50s that would buy these things. It's just all kind of that whole consumerism mindset. And that's kind of what I'm starting to see back here too, because maybe not Tesla as much, but, like, some cheaper electric cars are definitely made to last 2 to 3 years. And that's the typical lifespan of, you know, if you're leasing a car, if you're financing it, you'll flip it every 2 to 3 years. And that's just like me and you, I know we don't think like that. Like, I've had my car for 7 years and I'm not selling it anytime soon. So it's just like that mindset of, like, this generation that, you know, 2 to 3 years is how long you own a car, and then you get a new one, kind of thing. So very, very interesting seeing that in the electric industry.
Yeah, and I feel like it kind of lost its message. Initially, it was better for the environment and, like, just being mindful of the environment. Like, it's offsetting, you know, if you own it for 10 years and you're offsetting the production of the battery and all, and then it starts being kind of worth it for the environment because you're not burning fossil fuels all the time. But now that it's become a commodity, it's kind of like the same thing as fast fashion. It's creating a problem that was initially the solution.
Yeah, and kind of churning through, like, whatever, like, getting as many customers on board as possible.
Yeah. And
I saw something interesting, actually. It's funny you mentioned that, because I had this kind of in the closing, but it's a quote from this, like, engineer who actually works in Ontario. But yeah, he said electric car industry was made to revolutionize the car industry and not the environmental industry, which is interesting, because
that's an interesting point.
Yeah, because technically that is what it did. Like, if you look into the numbers, the environmental impact is, I mean, slim at best. But in terms of the car industry, it has completely, like, we see so many Teslas and electric cars on the road now.
Yeah, and I mean, it speaks for itself. The valuation of Tesla it beats everything.
Yeah, everything.
And I guess it was never really about the environment. It was just a hot trend that
Exactly.
they jumped on.
Yeah, and that's kind of sad, really. But I mean, we'll get into specifics here in a moment. But yeah, and then I just wanted to add one more thing about charging, because it used to be, again, that huge trend of the environment stuff. They used to make charging free. They used to have incentives so people would switch to electric. And now we're slowly seeing that being dialed back too, because even charging stations, like my girlfriend's sister, she has she has a Tesla, and she said like just to fill it from halfway is like $20 if you go to like a supercharger, which is like, I mean, that used to be free.
Yeah.
Like, you're still spending, like, it's not as expensive as gas for sure, but I feel like once it does go fully mainstream, it'll get there.
At that point, like my mom's car to fill it up is probably $40 to $50.
That's true. Yeah, so it is close for some cars. That's a good point.
Yeah, so like, I mean, if you get like a small 4-bang and that's fuel efficient,
yeah,
it's about the same price.
It's a good point. And I guess at home it's a little bit cheaper still. Like, this is where there's still a slight edge. I did the math here. So in Toronto with our electricity prices, which is already quite high, so it might be cheaper where you live. But the Tesla Model X, which is that big SUV, it costs about between $15 and $20 to fully charge from empty. So it's still a little bit on the lower side, and this is considered between 10 and 13 cents per kilowatt hour. And then the battery capacity is about 113 kilowatt hours. So I mean, it's still cheap. It's not by any means going to be more expensive than driving a gas-powered car, but in some circumstances, like, and especially as electricity becomes more expensive and there's more strain on the grid, it's going to become much more expensive.
Yeah, and that's another point. I don't know if Toronto has this. I'm guessing it probably has, because there's peak hours, right? So it's different rates at different times. So if you really want to be on the cheap end, you got to start worrying about like, oh, I can only plug it in after 11 p.m. and then unplug it at 6 a.m.
Exactly. And again, that might be worth it if you can save like $5. I mean, then it's like $10 instead of 15. Yeah. Sure. Then it's worth it for sure. But yeah, and again, like if you're doing this during peak hours, it might be closer to $30. So
that's true.
I mean, yeah, I guess it depends on when you're charging and stuff like that too. I didn't even think about that. Stuff we don't usually think about.
Yeah, it almost feels like homework. Like you got to start doing research about peak hours and then costs, and it's like, I need to fill it up. Like I need to go to work the next day. I don't want to start doing all this calculation.
Exactly. I will say it does seem kind of nice to just be able to plug it in at home and not have to go to a gas station. That does seem nice. But I mean, again, it's to each their own, I guess. Like, it's, if you're an environmental nut, you don't really give a shit about cars. First of all, why are you listening to this podcast? And second, like, okay, that's completely fine. Like, it's for those people. That's awesome. But for us car nerds, it's just,
that would be cool though. If you could like park in your garage, something came up and like wirelessly charge your car.
Like Apple's MagSafe.
Yeah, that'd be so dope.
I'm sure that's coming. I'm sure it is.
Business idea. Fuel for thought, wireless charging, Tesla wireless.
We'll build it into your garage for the low sum of $800,000.
Yeah, that's another thing though. Like Tesla chargers are expensive.
Yeah, there is, I think, right now there is a subsidy in Ontario for it, but I know it's not very much. Like, I think they're like $800 to install, and it's like $200 subsidy, something like that.
Really? I thought it was like $10,000 for.
Okay, maybe for the supercharger. I know they're like basic ones are like under $1,000, but.
Oh, okay, that's not bad then.
Yeah, it's okay. But yeah, again, if you want a fast charger, that's the other thing. Like, if you need it in a couple hours, but it's an overnight charger kind of thing, and it's cheaper. And that's again another thing. Okay, now the next big thing is the problem of distance. We've kind of already touched on this, but kind of want to hit a couple more points on that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so again, we want to touch on the fact that there's some areas in Canada, well, actually most of Canada, where there's just no charging points. And if there is, it might not be compatible with the type of electric car you have, or it's just not sufficient to charge it quickly enough for your road trip if you are doing one. Unless you're like staying in a hotel in that town or something. But
I'd be curious to know. So every big province would be fine. It's just Manitoba and Saskatchewan would probably be tough.
Exactly.
Because it's just fields. Like,
it is.
You have to plan this whole thing about like, okay, I can only go here and then charge here to there, and then there's so many. It's so much harder.
Dead spots, hey? Yeah. I mean, even in Ontario, like I drove like during COVID. So I had to drive through Canada, which is horrendous. You always want to go through the States. But there's this stretch between, it's somewhere in Ontario. I think it's Thunder Bay and Sault Ste. Marie or something, where there's this 2-lane highway that kind of goes along the Great Lakes there. And it's just, I think it's like 250 kilometers without even like a bathroom, which is crazy. So I'm sure like there would be chargers maybe like 250, 300 kilometers. But again, if you have like a Nissan Leaf, that's not going to make that.
Yeah, and you gotta think about it too. You can't just like drive. You gotta plan everything.
Exactly.
You gotta be like calculate everything, and then make sure you're not like speeding or like accelerating that much.
It's true. You're always playing a game of like, let's be like extra cautious of how much electricity we're using. And also if you're driving at night, right, like you need to use headlights and everything, like that's also going to drain it more.
That's true.
So it's all these different things to think of. But yeah, and then like again, even finding gas stations sometimes is hard. Like I remember even in driving to BC from Alberta, there's I think 175 kilometer stretch. And it's like it's very well traveled. There's thousands of people using it every day, but still no gas station for 175 kilometers, and obviously no charging in that either.
And the issue when you get stranded with those cars, it's not like, let's say a gas car, you call someone, can you go get like a can of gas, and then I'll make it. But a Tesla, you have to get towed.
Yeah, there's literally, unless you have like a huge power bank or something, I don't even know if that exists, but
no. The only way would be like a giant diesel generator, but then you need a charger, and who the hell carries a Tesla charger?
That's a good point. Interesting. I never thought of that. So yeah, you're pretty much screwed if you end up with a dead battery somewhere.
Yeah, you get towed.
That's a really important point, actually. But yeah, I mean, this just makes it so much harder when you're traveling by car if you think about these things. Because, I mean, it's not impossible. I'm not trying to be like super pessimistic about this, but you do need to really plan out your trips. Like if you are planning to drive across the US or across Canada, like you really need to plan where your stops are going to be and how much you're going to need to charge and how long you're going to have to charge and when you need a full charge. Because, I mean, if you have a Tesla, you're probably fine. But if you have any like smaller, cheaper electric car, you really have to think about that quite heavily.
And it might not even be the case of I can fully charge it at every station, because it takes 8 hours to fully charge.
Exactly.
So you're like, charge here for 2 hours, then charge here for 4 hours, and charge here. And it just makes the trip like
it's so much longer. Exactly. Especially if you're trying to get somewhere in a certain amount of time, and then you have to factor that in too. It adds a lot. But again, this is something that can be fixed in the future. But to be honest, like even the gas station situation is still not fixed. I mean, we've had gas powered cars for almost 100 years.
Yeah.
So I'm curious if it will to some extent be fixed. I think that charge times will increase.
Hopefully.
Or decrease, sorry. But yeah.
I think the real purpose of an electric car is more like where it really shines is, let's say, LA traffic or really small distances that in a car are very inefficient, because the worst fuel economy you'll ever get is in city with a gas car.
Exactly.
It's, stop and go, and like accelerating, stop at a red light and all that. So that's where the electric car really shines. But I personally don't believe we'll ever see electric semis. I know Tesla is like hinting at them, but long distance, like cruising at highway speeds, that's where, especially diesels, they really shine. Yeah. An electric it has great torque, and that's what the electric car is built for, is torque, instant torque. But at high RPM, rolling, keeping your speed relatively unchanged, that's where the gas powered engine shines.
Definitely. Yeah, and that's a good point actually, because in the city, like, it's perfect, really. Like we said, for small countries too, like if you literally just drive 10 kilometers to work, 10 kilometers back, like a Tesla charge will last you 2 weeks. Yeah. And I mean, it costs $15 to charge up at home. So I mean, you're chilling. That's a great idea, especially if you don't care about cars. Like that's amazing. Like if you can afford the upfront cost of a Tesla or to finance it or whatever, like that's a good investment if you think that way. But again, like with the countries we live in, and like most people traveling longer distances to get to work or even just to see family and stuff, it just doesn't make that much sense, I think. Yeah. But yeah, anyway, so now I want to kind of move on to the cost aspect, because this is a big part of it, and that is the cost of battery replacement. We kind of already touched on this, but adding a little bit of I guess detail to it. But I mean, like cycling batteries has always been a problem. Like a battery that can hold its full charge for its entire life doesn't exist yet, which is kind of crazy. Yeah. It just, all the materials wear down for every charge cycle and stuff like that. It's the same with your phone, same with any electric device you have. And over time, it just depletes to pretty much zero. And then you have to replace the battery. But when you have a car that's 600 pounds of battery, it gets a little bit more complicated.
Yeah. And the craziest, so the biggest issue with any electric car, so the crazy thing to me is essentially like battery packs are just like, they're bigger than like AAAs or whatever, but they're just like giant stacks of, let's say, AAA batteries, like all glued together in a giant row and makes the entire floorboard. But the biggest issue is rows. So like if one row of battery fails, it's going to put extra strain on all the other batteries, which are then decreasing the lifespan. And you can't just get in there and like start fixing everything because it's sealed. So that's why we're seeing so many battery packs failing, because one row, one band will fail, and then everything else will fail just way faster than what they're predicting.
Wow, that's interesting. I didn't know that actually. But I think at the same time that explains a lot, because I was reading on Reddit a couple like articles and stuff, and there's so much disparity between people saying like, oh, a battery in a Tesla or whatever electric car lasts only 2 years, and some people are like, no, it lasts 8 to 10 years. I'm like, what the hell? Why is there such a big difference? But it's probably because of that. Because some people have those issues depending on where they live, and some people, you know, they live in a climate where it makes sense most year, and it, like they just have a good battery pack, I guess. So then it can last longer, or at least, you know, last at like 80% for that amount of time.
And the issue here is like, because battery packs are so expensive, we're seeing like, if your Tesla is, let's say, under 80% battery health, the value will just plummet.
Exactly.
It will be almost worthless, because replacing it is, first of all, labor is insane, because you gotta basically remove the whole car.
Yeah.
And then the cost is insane too. So your car is pretty much totaled.
Yeah. And not only that, but it kind of contradicts the whole idea in the first place, the environment, right?
Yeah.
Like pretty much that's going to the junkyard after the battery dies, because nobody wants to pay to replace it. So people are going to buy a new Tesla, and that just defeats the whole fucking purpose. Like it literally is going to the landfill, or I guess maybe recycled, but still batteries are useless. Like
you can't really recycle batteries.
Yeah, that's the thing. And that's the thing that just doesn't make sense to me. It's like that part was not thought out at all. And enlighten us if we're missing some aspect of the recycling process for this, but like it just doesn't make much sense to me.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea that it is in place. We've built a network of charging stations, but I think the biggest issue, which a lot of people, a lot of engineers and companies agree, is the failure point is the batteries. The lithium batteries are not good. There is, you know, rumors, there's always like these headlines once in a while of new hydrogen powered or new saltwater powered batteries, or like different technologies of batteries, but they're never like foolproof.
Exactly.
That's why like we're so resilient or so focused on gas powered engines, because they've been around for many years. You know, if you take care of it, will last basically forever. Whereas batteries, the technology is just not there.
Yeah.
We're still in the early days. I really hope something comes out that's, you know, lasts longer, because really if you're like you're lucky if you're going to put 100,000 miles on a Tesla.
That's the thing. Yeah.
And an engine can last, if you take care of it, I don't know, half a million.
Yeah, depends on the car, I guess, but yeah, definitely a lot more.
And semi trucks are insane. They like easily will do 2 million kilometers.
It's crazy.
Yeah, and
that's the other thing too. Like almost when you're looking at a Tesla or like an electric car in general now, you have to start factoring in that cost of replacement battery if you're planning on keeping it, right? Like if you're planning on keeping that for the long haul till it dies or whatever, like even though the car initially is expensive, you also have to factor in the like yearly cost, you know, the total cost of the battery divided by the years you're planning on owning it. That actually should be factored into the price, so it makes it even more expensive.
And that's something people are deceived on. So they'll go to a Tesla dealership and then they'll be like, you don't have to change your oil, you don't have to you know, do all these transmission flushes or coolant flushes. You know, you're saving so much on maintenance, but they're not going to tell you about, oh yeah, in, I don't know, 5 years, you're going to have to change your whole battery pack.
That's
the whole powertrain.
Exactly. Yeah, it does, of course, help that there's less moving parts. That's always a plus. But again, the battery pack is a much larger problem. It's probably equivalent to the price of an engine, really.
Yeah, and even like the electric motors, they can also fail.
That's true. It's another failure point, yeah.
Yeah, we don't hear like them being as bad, but there's 4 of them. You know, one could go at any time.
Exactly. It's just an electrical moving device, so it's definitely possible. Okay, now for the most controversial part.
Yeah.
This actually shocked me when I researched this, but they're actually not nearly as clean as you'd think. And this is the crazy part, because it really reinforces that idea of that it revolutionized the car industry, not the environmental industry. So yeah, even just to start off, like everyone already knows this, but just the sheer like dangerous and toxic and flammable chemicals and stuff that are needed to build these batteries is just terrible for the environment, especially when it comes to the end of the life cycle and we need to recycle it, or it goes into a landfill. It's so much worse than anything coming from a combustion engine. So that's first. Second is the different elements and minerals which are already limited that are needed for battery production, and they also need to be manufactured around the world. So there's a lot of like freight shipping and stuff going on, which adds so much carbon dioxide output, because like, for example, like lithium is mostly in like South America, and then cobalt is mostly in Congo, which is in Africa. And then, like the manufacturing is mostly in Europe, sometimes in Russia, sometimes in China. Like it's all over the world. And that's not something you really see with combustion engines. Like usually there's a plant. Sure, you still need the raw materials. You need the metals and everything that needs to come from somewhere, but it's not nearly as far-reaching as electric components.
Yeah, there's still a lot, like catalytic converters need titanium, and then you still have a battery in your car, so that's
of course
also lithium. But it's not as like intensive. It's not as many components. Like if you think of a normal gas-powered car, it's not really that complicated. Yeah, there's a lot of wiring and a bunch of stuff, but at its core it's aluminum block with a transmission and axles. Yeah,
and of course, like especially Tesla, like the scale has made a lot of this better, because the shipping and stuff, it's in huge quantities, so it's a lot less bad for the environment now. But it just kind of pisses me off when people try to, be like, oh, I'm being good for the environment because I drive an electric car. It's like, shut up. You don't even know what goes into the whole process of this. Because even just doing a quick, like, surface level research of this, I know that it's as bad, if not worse, than combustion engines over the entire life of the cars, which is crazy to me. Yeah. So, like, let's put some numbers to this. So, even just building a gas or diesel powered car usually produces about 7 to 10 tons of CO2, depending on where in the world this is and emissions and stuff like that. But don't forget that whole body also has to be created for an electric car. So same thing, 7 to 10 tons of CO2. But now we get to the battery production, and this is priced at about 150 kilograms of carbon dioxide. This is what I've read in multiple sources. 150 kilograms of carbon dioxide is produced for every kilowatt hour of battery that's produced. So if you look at something like the Model X, for example, 26 tons of CO2 on top of that. That's that's 40 tons of CO2 already. So, even if you drive a gas-powered car for a couple of years, it's still not going to be up there yet.
And it's only going to get worse. Yes. If you think about it, like mining is a process of from easy to hard. Yeah. Right? We're getting surface mining, but then we remove all the metals, so we have to dig deeper and deeper. So it's only going to increase the CO2 production. Exactly. And get harder and harder to refine these metals.
Yeah, and that's just the surface of it too, because so many areas that service like electricity are still fossil fuels. Like there's so much of China, so much of even Canada that's coal-powered electricity.
Alberta's
that's the thing, right? And then it still adds even more to the footprint already. And coal, honestly, it's worse than gasoline. For like even throughout the whole refining process, coal is worse. So now you have an electric car that used 40 tons instead of 10 to build in the first place, and then you're also using it on coal energy. And sure, you can run it on wind power, you can run it on hydro. Some places have that. Then it's okay. Then you're completely fine. If you have it for a couple of years, it'll make sense. It'll be more green overall. But some people just don't consider the whole scope of this, like how much you have to think about where exactly everything is coming from, like even your electricity.
Yeah, I really think the electric car was a nice idea to the pollution and environment, but I think in reality it's not the solution at all. I think it's gone completely the wrong way. Yeah. And even if we refine it and try to improve it, I don't think it's a solution. I think if we're looking for something better for the environment, individual cars are not the solution.
Exactly.
You need some sort of, public transport, or there's other ways to really improve, and I think we're just slowing down the progress.
Exactly like you said, like it's just kind of a project that got derailed essentially. Yeah. And like if you think about, someone needs a tub of yogurt from a store. I actually read this in an article, so I got this idea from somewhere, but the inefficiency of getting in your car, even if it's electric, and going to the store to buy yogurt is ridiculous. Like it makes zero sense. And like humans aren't rational, that makes complete sense. But like public transit and everything, if we can improve those systems, as much as it might cost to do that, like even in Toronto, we have decent, like it's pretty decent. Like we take a train to work and stuff like that. It's pretty well done. And like it saves, if you think about all the people that take the train, for example, if they all had to drive in, like the amount of CO2 emissions that it saves, and people are like, why are trains diesel? It's like, well, it's way better. Even if it was electric cars that people are driving, it's still going to be way better. Yeah. Even just for the power grid. So, I mean, that's just probably the way forward.
It's a crazy point to think about though. Like, if I take the train, then one car probably has 200 people times 12. That's a lot of people. Yeah, that's a lot of cars that would have been on the highway.
Exactly. And like, not even just for congestion's sake, but even, say if even 10% of those people drove gas cars or electric cars, whatever. Either way, it's still going to be, even if they were all electric, like think about, I mean, our power grid's hydro, but even hydro still produces some CO2. They still have to produce it, right? That would probably still be more pollution than taking the train.
Yeah.
Which is crazy to think. So that is definitely the way forward. It's obviously not doable everywhere, but I don't know. It's an interesting thing to think about. I think the electric car was a cool idea. I think in some places like big cities and more densely populated areas where a car is useful but maybe not necessary is a very good spot for electric cars to be. But obviously, as we've uncovered, they have their faults.
Yeah.
But yeah, I honestly like leave your thoughts down below. I'm curious what you guys think about this. And yeah, the one thing I wanted to add is just the flammability of these things. Because that's just a whole other level. Because you don't want to get in a crash with one of these cars, at least like a high speed crash. Because if you guys watched Top Gear, I think it was the Grand Tour where Richard Hammond drove that Rimac.
Yeah.
And that thing just burned. I think it was like 3 or 4 days it burned for. It was ridiculous.
Well, that's the thing, because it's acid and like an acid fire. Yeah. You can't just put it out with
you can't, yeah.
Just water.
You have to let it burn.
Well, there is ways. I think it's some sort of like what's the opposite of acidic?
Like a basic solution.
Basic. Yeah, some sort of basic foam that will kind of like cover the whole solution and suffocate it.
Right.
But like no fire truck has that just carrying it. They just have water, and then there's no like quick access. So you need to basically like call the next town over, or if your town has it, and then it's going to take like 2 hours for them to show up, and by then like nothing's left. It's just all burnt.
It's all gone. And even I think a cargo ship over, I think it was in the close to Europe in the ocean there, I think it had like 4,000 or 5,000 electric cars on it, and I think it burned for a week straight, and everyone just kind of abandoned it and let it do its thing. Like even with all that seawater, they just couldn't put it out. Like just let it burn.
Yeah. That's crazy.
Think about the fumes from that. That's horrible.
That's going to cause some intense acid rains afterwards.
Yeah, 100%. But even just the CO2 from burning that acid too, it's crazy.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Anyway, yeah, so that was our rip on electric cars. Someone feel free to at us with the gas-powered version of this and ripping on gas cars, because they're obviously not all perfect either.
I thought like straight piping your car with no catalytic converter is great for the environment.
Especially those those Volkswagens that had the emissions problems with the diesel. Those were really good for the environment. Those were awesome.
Yeah, like the black smoke and stuff. That's great.
And rolling coal. That's even better. But yeah, so essentially breaking this all down for you, don't buy an electric car in a cold city or somewhere. If you have to commute a long period of time every day, it's probably not a good choice for you. Although maybe the newer Teslas, maybe it is. Some have 600 kilometer range, might be possible for you. Again, this thing just keeps sticking with me, that they're made to revolutionize the car industry and not the environmental industry. So interesting thing to kind of think about, let it mellow in your head and think about it. But yeah, there's also just no personality in these things. Sure,
That's
they're
so
fast.
boring.
They're fast, but there's no sound. There's nothing to enjoy about it. That's kind of the sad thing.
Literally, the Tesla has nothing. It's just like a dashboard and then a screen. Like
Yeah.
that's so. That goes against everything for car enthusiasts.
Exactly, and it feels like you're sitting in like a simulator, really.
Yeah, I mean the car even drives itself.
Yeah, like there's no, like it's cool, it's futuristic, and of course there's an audience for that. But for car people, it feels like a step backwards.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's kind of the main thing here. And the last thing I'll say before we stop here is, I think it gets a bad rap too in Canada, and especially in Canada. I don't know how it is in the U.S. or other countries, but I feel like even us, like as soon as you see someone driving a Tesla or something, you think they're like some big environmentalist or some tree hugger type person. And that's fine, but just for that reason, I probably wouldn't buy one, because everyone just gets this certain idea of you. And again, it's kind of that, like herd mentality kind of, that I need to fit in. Oh, I need a Tesla to fit in kind of thing. I feel like half the people that own Teslas don't even really care about the actual benefits to the environment. They kind of just want to have a cool car or fit in or whatever.
Yeah, I can see that.
But yeah, anyway, if you have a Tesla, nice knowing you. Have a great day.
We've been unsubscribed.
Yeah, but yeah, that's our view. Feel free to hit us back with what you think about gas cars. Rip us apart. That's what this is all about. We're here to battle it out till one comes out on top. So yeah, anything else to add?
That's it.
Sweet. All right, guys. I'll see you in episode 26. This is Field for Thought signing off. I'm Jay.
Kevin.
See you guys.
Goodbye.